Hello, and welcome to the Build Better Homes podcast. I'm your host, Royal Mortier with PLIRIS, and as always, I have my co-host with me here, John O'Shea, our COO at PLIRIS. And how are you doing today, John?
I'm doing good. You know, it's a balmy 50 degrees here in McMinnville, Oregon. I'm in wine country out here, so I can't complain. I know you're in Florida, but I do love my wine. So it's a beautiful day out here and just happy to be here. So how about you? How are you?
I'm doing great. And I mean, as a former Northwestern Oregonian, and I lived in multiple different wine regions, if you're going to be depressed, at least have some wine, right?
That's right. I think there's 300 wineries or something like that in like 80 square miles around here or something. It's pretty phenomenal. So
yeah, it's pretty amazing. Well, very cool, man. Back in the 70s, we had a cold stint there here in North Florida, but we're back warm again. And
so you took your sweater off for that winter weather?
Yeah, I took the sweater off. And I mean, it's in the 70s, so I'm still wearing pants. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
pants.
That's a big one.
Yeah, the pants. But, you know, once we get back into the 80s again, then we can go back into shorts weather.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited. You know, we've talked about ICF. In ICF, there's a lot of intricacies. There's a lot of specialty elements to it. There's things you got to account for. There's really some subject matter experts when it comes to ICF that have been working with ICF for a very long time. And I'm pleased to have one here on the show. Robert Klob is joining us from Arizona, and he is the owner of Robert Klob Design. And now you've actually just started a consulting side of it where you're actually consulting on other people's designs, which is awesome. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing great. Great to be here to join in the weather conversation. It's 80 some degrees and I'm in shorts today. So
hey, there you go.
I put a collared shirt on for this interview.
There we go. Yeah, Robert and I, we've got to work back and forth on some projects, share our woes of some other designers and engineers working on ICF. Robert's very, very well known in the industry. He and I got to hang out together at the last International Builder Show in Vegas. We were at that dinner and we were sitting at that dinner and you and I were having a nice conversation and you were wearing a very nice watch. I was wearing a nice watch. And then you brought to my attention that there was a 2-story watch shop in Caesar's Palace. My plan was to just go home, go back to the hotel right after dinner as the restaurant was like right across the street. Instead, I took a nice long trek through Vegas to find a 2-story high-end watch store in the Caesar's Palace. So it sent me on an adventure. So that was good. Yeah, they had some very nice watches and some great service. And I got to try on some watches that I probably will never, ever be able to afford. But it was
Robert,
cool.
Are you a Rolex guy? I know Royal's a Breitling. Is that how you pronounce it? Breitling guy? Isn't that your brand?
Breitling and Artima PK.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I don't have a Rolex. I think the one I was wearing the night Royal and I don't think I had my Breitling on.
You had your Pajani.
That sounds fancy.
I have a Zenith that's really nice. Interesting thing about that is I was actually doing some work a few years back for a jewelry wholesaler.
Okay.
And he would get these pieces in and, hey, I owe you $5,000. Can I just trade you for this? And okay.
Oh yeah. You know what? I've been in that scenario as a framing contractor. I had this guy hire me to build his shop and he wanted a little 12 by I think 40 lean-to off the side of the shop. And he had enough money to contract the shop. But then he's like, you know what? I have this 1987 Corvette and it's the fiberglass bodied one with the, the giant Batman looking car. And he's like, you know what? I'll trade you this 87 Corvette if you guys will frame this lean-to. And I made the deal. And so I had a 1987 Corvette in my house for a couple years. I drove it for a couple years just as fun as a novelty and then ended up trading it for a truck. But that's so funny when we get into those situations where you're doing work for somebody and they're offer you something like that. And it's like, sometimes it's a little too good to be true. That the Corvette was okay. It was a little rickety. It went fast. It was kind of a heavy fiberglass body 80s Corvette. But so you got a watch out of the deal.
I've actually got several watches out of the deal. And I think actually Royal, the one I was wearing was my Panerai. But my problem is now my wife has kind of entered into the luxury watch world.
Oh, geez.
And, she now has Breitling and some others. And it's like, wait a minute, I thought, this was just for me. But we got to keep our wives happy. So we do what we got to do.
There you go.
Nice.
There you go.
Yeah. I don't have many vices. I don't drink a lot. I I like my wine, but I've had some really good $5 bottles and some great $500 bottles. So,
Sure.
I'm not a big wine connoisseur, but watches has become my vice.
Yeah, I've got one more that once I reach some certain goals, that's the watch I want. And I think that'll be the last watch I buy. I'm done after that.
See, my issue, like, I think some of my kids are trying to start killing me off or something because they're all taking dibs on which watch they want in the will.
Yeah, there you go.
But I've told all my kids, you don't get them. My grandsons get all the watches. You guys don't get anything.
There you go. Well, hey, so yeah, we're not a watch show. We're a home construction show. So yeah, I would love to hear your story, where you started, how you got into ICF, and we'll start there.
When I was a kid, my dad was a contractor. So I've been on construction sites since I was really little. There's pictures of me about 3 years old, just a little bit taller than the 5-gallon bucket, picking up scraps of wood on my dad's job sites. And
we all have the same background. This is crazy. I mean, I don't mean to interrupt, but if you've listened to the other podcast or not, we literally all have the same background.
Yep.
Funny.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Well, and I was on this site and this old man comes up on the site and he starts, telling people what to do. And I said, I was 13 years old. I said, who's the old man? And he said, well, he's the architect. What's an architect? And they said, well, come here, I'll introduce you. And so I started asking him questions and he looks at me and he says, how old are you? And I said, I'm 13. And he says, I've never had some snot-nosed little kid asking me questions about my drawings before. And he said, would you like to see some more? And I said, sure. He said, why don't you come by my office tomorrow after school and I'll show you some. So I did and spent several hours with him. And this is back in the 80s and, showed me the drafting table and how it worked.
Did it have the slide thing?
The slide thing
on the cables, and then you use the square and all that.
Yep. Broke out the scales, the little templates to draw the doors and the toilets and sinks and whatnot. And I was just fascinated by it. He said, "Well, yesterday you enjoy construction." I said, "Well, yeah, I enjoy doing it." And he said, "You were up on that roof yesterday. It was pretty hot. Did you like that?" And I said, "No, that sucked." And he said, what if I told you could stay in this business but sit in an air-conditioned office all day? And that's the best sales job anybody's ever done on me. I actually went to work for him as an apprentice the next day, worked under him for several years all through high school, petitioned my high school to allow me to take college. He was also, back in the 80s, every college in America was teaching drafting. And this is in a small town in Colorado. And he was a drafting teacher. And the high school let me go over in the mornings to do drafting classes and come back and do my high school classes at night. And I'd get graded on a project in the morning and come back and work for 3 or 4 hours after school, and I'd get paid for it. And that's how I entered into this industry. Been doing it now for 41 years, something like that. But the thing is, I've designed and worked on pretty much every type of project imaginable, literally from outhouses to high rises and everything in between. I actually did an outhouse for a guy. He wanted a very elaborate outhouse. It was kind of crazy.
Did you get that engineered? Did you get that engineered for flow rates?
Engineered. We were able to get it prescriptive.
Okay. All right. Very good.
As I say, it's kind of a crappy job, though. There we go.
There it is.
But I've kind of, been around the business for a long time. And interesting enough, early in my career, I did more of a drafting service and a design service. And I started doing a lot of work with structural engineers, MP&E engineers. It was the early 90s. And a lot of them didn't have CAD. And so they kind of trained me to be kind of a, junior designer, if you will. I don't want to call myself a structural designer or a mechanical designer, but I know enough to be dangerous. I can read a ductilator and size a footing if I need to. It kind of gave me a really strong, well-rounded approach to, as I started entering more into the design world and hanging my own shingle and kind of doing my own thing. It's really given me a holistic approach to all the components of a building and how it all goes together and how one needs to think of the other in designing. It's always fun when you get, you guys on your engineering side, the mechanical wants to run a 20-inch duct through your 18-inch beam.
Right.
Someone's working the design on the front end of that to resolve some of those issues even before they become issues. And I think that's where all that training kind of led up to really understanding building as a whole. Back in the 90s, I had actually designed a couple ICF projects. And the first one, it was a small ICF project. It was terrible support. It had terrible customer service. The block itself was terrible. The installer was terrible. Everything about it was horrible. Horrible experience. The client was upset. I hated it. I'll keep designing homes during, wood construction. And a couple of years later, someone else comes up. I want to do this ICF thing. I'm like, I don't know. Oh, it's supposed to be different. Well, it wasn't. And it was at that point I vowed I'll never do another ICF project. Don't want any part of it. The industry sucks. The product sucks. Everything about it sucks. Fast forward about 7 years, I was doing a local home show, had a booth set up, and this guy comes walking up and he says, "Have you ever done an ICF home?" And I said, "Yeah, shut up." He says, "Well, I'm a local rep, for one of the big national brands." And I said, "Yeah, I've done a couple of them. They were a pain. I didn't enjoy it. The clients didn't enjoy it. There's just no part of it." He said, "Let me talk to you about our product. Let me tell you how we can solve some of the issues you've had." I was like, "Yeah, I don't know." He said, "I have cold beer at my booth." I said, "Let's go." I can be bought. I mean,
that's right.
So I walked over to his booth, and his big booth set up with all the big block systems behind. And he starts telling me about it and show me. I told him some of the issues we had, and he showed me how that some of the newer technology blocks had kind of solved those problems, and really backed it up with the support and the customer service. And he said, "Here's the deal. I have a client that needs his house designed with ICF. I'm handing you a client. Whatever your rate is, I'm handing it to you." He said, "If you like it, you can do another one. If you don't like it, let me try and show you that there's a better way to do it."
Sure.
He said, "If you don't like it, yeah, we shared a cold beer together and shook hands, and we all go our separate ways. And if you enjoy it, we'll do some more. Worst case, you're going to make a little bit of money on it." So I said, "Okay, I have nothing else to lose." So I did. I just actually finished about a year ago the second house for that same client.
Oh, wow.
And getting the feedback from that client and the subsequent clients of how happy they are in their ICF home. And I get emails from clients in Southern Florida as some of the big hurricanes have hit of how safe they felt, or how, a home I designed down in the Keys, all the homes around it were completely destroyed. And was it 2017 when that Cat 5 came rolling up through the Florida Keys and kind of blocked off US 1 for a month or two. The Metacumbe Resort across the street from my client's home had $5 million damage. I had to rebuild the whole thing. My client had $5,000 damage. I had to power wash the floor in his garage.
Right.
It's
Amazing.
those kinds of stories that say, this is why you do what you do. Creating homes that are safer, creating homes that are more energy efficient, creating homes that are better for the people that live in them. And those are those stories that make it exciting to do this every day. And so about 2005, I actually just transitioned my practice, and just started designing only ICF homes. And that's pretty much where I've been since.
So you've been sitting in the pocket of ICF homes for 20 years, just exclusively?
I've designed other projects. I've had clients that started with ICF, and for budget reasons or different reasons, they had to switch. It happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't actively go after any other type of project other than ICF. In 2012, I was approached by the Portland Cement Association to help them be on the development committee for the new above ground concrete wall code, which is the ICF building codes. It's always fun. I have my code book by my desk. It's an older version, but talking to plan reviewers, and I can open it up and say the development committee, and my name's in it.
Yeah.
So tell me again, Mr. Building Official, how you know more about this than I do.
What has been the evolution? So you talk about it in the 90s, how it kind of was really difficult to design and to even find a contractor to do it. How has it evolved over the last 30 years with your involvement in it? Like, is the design the same? It's just we have more talented people, or are we more sophisticated as a building industry because we all know it moves at snail pace? What have you seen in the evolution of it?
It's kind of all the above. Some of the product lines that were in the 90s have evolved into, there was one mega ICF brand in the 90s called Blue Max. Right around 2000-ish, Blue Max kind of blew apart. And that's actually what created a lot of the current brands that we see today, especially the larger brands, all stemmed from, they were Blue Max people that left Blue Max and started their own companies, Fox Blocks and Nudura and Build Block, and the larger players in the industry came from there. With that, they brought their own ideas of where they thought Blue Max was doing things right. And Blue Max was kind of a different technology then as well. They'd kind of created their own market, and they were kind of going in the right direction. Like most industries, it was customer service. You can have the best product in the world, but if your customer service sucks, it doesn't do anybody any good. And I think that was probably my bigger issue, is the products themselves weren't necessarily bad looking back on them. They got labeled as bad because the company didn't train the contractors properly. The company didn't support the product properly. And so when you had that happen, it made the product bad. When the product, it is what it is. It's a block. I got samples here. I mean, it's all it is. It's not, nothing special. It's a big Lego. But when you don't have the service and the support behind it, from a design standpoint, there wasn't the technology, there wasn't the engineering, there wasn't, it wasn't part of the prescriptive code like it is today. Things like that. I think that's the big difference, is codes have changed, codes have adapted. Some of the products that we have now have evolved into more builder friendly, to the point some argue for, some argue against. It's now even kind of DIY friendly. A lot of them, like, I kind of disagree a little bit, but I have had some great DIY projects, clients that built themselves and did a great job. And I've had some others that ran into some issues and challenges. I've helped others that went down that road and hired me as a consultant to come in and help pick up the pieces and fix the problem because it was made to be just like Legos. Well, it's not really.
When you design a home, do you have to start with the idea that you're going to use ICF, or can you take a standard wood frame plan and turn it into an ICF, or do you have to take the ICF into consideration at the first onset and design from there? I'd imagine maybe that's probably where you start in the design process.
Ideally, if we know that that's what you wanted, and most of my clients today come to me wanting an ICF home.
They don't bring you a wood frame plan and say, make it an ICF house.
I do have some of that. I've kind of created a couple different extensions of my business. One is primary design side. Those people are coming to me. They found me online. I admin, several of the largest ICF related Facebook groups. My smallest group, I think, is 8,000 members. My biggest group is like 17 or 18,000 members. People come to me from those groups. They come to me with knowledge. They come to me, this is our goal. This is what we want. So I don't have a lot of the back and forth and we're bidding it against this, we're bidding it against that. What I do have also, though, are the clients that buy stock home plans online. It's designed as a 2x6. They want it converted to ICF. And so I do plan conversion as well. And sometimes, though, that's where challenges come in. I actually consulted with a client in Texas last week about a project, and ICF is great. There's really few things that we can't design in ICF that we can in traditional wood and masonry construction. This particular home, the design professional, you have a block that's 4 feet long, 12 inches thick. 11 and a quarter inches thick, whatever. You're trying to make an 8-inch jog to create a little architectural feature. That gets really expensive. It can be done, but it gets really expensive really fast. It's better to make that all one plane of wall and then build out, a pop out, if you will, on that wall to give it the thickness to get that architectural feature. And rather than trying to change the footings and change the wall structure and wrap rebar through these funky little S corners and things like that, it gets really expensive really fast. And so those are those things that, sometimes we make those alignments as cost-saving measures, but then come back with other alternatives to get that same look. But
so you can basically
curves and angles and weird things.
Yeah. I know working from production builders for so long that, purchasing would always say corners cost money. And so they tell myself, that was part of the design group, that, obviously we limit the amount of jogs in the building and it's more cost effective. But then if you have no jogs, then it just looks like a box. And so there needs to be some architectural, not accentuations, but massing changes where you have like an articulation to make it look better. So I totally get that. VE process is part of it as well, it sounds like.
If I'm designing from day one, then I already take that into consideration into my design and work those things through. The bigger challenge that I run into with those that are converting maybe a wood frame home to ICF is the size requirements. You're talking about a 2x6 wall versus an 11 and a quarter, 11 and a half, 12 inch thick wall. And the building code says when we figure our square footage, it's got to be all inclusive of the wall. Mm-hmm. And when you're dealing with a 11, 12 inch thick wall, that's roughly almost 10% of your floor area. So I tell my client, you want a 3,000 square foot house, your house is either going to be A, 2,700 square feet, because that's your usable space, or B, it's going to be 3,300 square feet, because I need that extra 10% to give you the 3,000 square foot home you want. My property taxes are going to go up. Well, where's that happy medium then? To get you what you want, it is a little bit of a give and take. I think that's where a lot of people kind of misunderstand sometimes where the numbers actually come from. And it's just, we're dealing with a thicker wall.
Sure. Yeah. And there can be lot coverage and also lot line requirements where like you're constrained by that. So yeah, that's interesting. Well, thank you for giving us your background and where you came from and how you got here. That is super interesting. I think coming from almost a predominantly wood frame background for myself anyways, it's so interesting to kind of hear the nuanced differences. I know I hear Royal talk about the differences in design and also in the HVAC systems that have to be taken into consideration and the different heating and cooling and moisture stuff that has to be taken into consideration. And then there's a bunch of different details. I know that, weren't you talking, Royal, about like floors that are now ICF, or was that a steel frame? Remember the house we were looking at in New York for the...
Yeah, that New Jersey one? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so we can do ICF floor systems, we can do ICF roof systems, and then you also have the more common ability to get some really long spans. We'll use steel pan, or now there's a steel truss, steel joist, steel pan combo system that actually works really well. And we can do those to get some really long spans. The biggest difficulty of those in wood construction is not only the span with a wood member, but also then getting those loads to properly tie into an exterior wall system. So in residential with ICF and using an ICF floor system, and we can get spans 25, 30 feet, no problem. And wood construction, you're not going to be able to do that without some really large members, a much deeper floor system. It just adds some extra difficulties and intricacies. The one exception to that being with our Shawwood product that uses the glue lam frame systems. There's less than 50 Shawwood houses so far constructed in the US. Yeah. So, not nearly as prevalent. Whereas with ICF, with my prior firm, we were doing probably 4 to 10 ICF houses a month just in the Oregon, Washington region. So it's much more prevalent. It's been around for a lot longer, but there's constant innovations with it. And as Robert alluded to, there's a few companies that really, they've done it right with not only their product, but also the customer service that's tied to it. There's more people constantly coming into the industry. But really, when it comes down to it, your perimeter block, if you're doing ICF for your floors or ICF for your roof, staying with the tried and true, because they've considered all of the constructability difficulties, and they have a whole support team there to assist with it.
The ICF world, there's, I think, now 42 brands in North America manufacturing some type of ICF, wall system. Wow. Some are doing it like any other industry. Some are doing it much better than others. Clients that come to me and they say, okay, which is the best one? In my mind, they're all great because they're all better than wood. But aside from that, it's who's going to give us the best support? What can we serve wherever you are in the country? How can we service your area? If your product is manufactured in Salt Lake City and you're going to build in Georgia, does it make sense to ship it across the country? Whereas other companies actually have manufacturing in Georgia. So I can ship it 2 hours to your site or 3 days to your site, which makes more sense. So sometimes that comes into play. But the big one for me is, of those 42 brands, probably a dozen or so actually have gone the extra level and got actual code approval and code testing, ESR report and so on. And it's nice for me to come in, especially a jurisdiction that maybe they don't have the ICF experience, their building officials or inspectors don't have it, but I can pull out a code report that's been approved by the ICC and say, here is Foxblox's report. And as long as it's built to that and the inspector can read it and go in the field and see the details and see the notes and what have you in the field, and there's a comfort level that he can accept it. It's basically been kind of quasi pre-approved. Whereas if there isn't that and you can't provide something like that, and now we're getting into more special inspections, we're getting into more resistance from the municipalities and so on. So those are those things where having that ability as kind of that added resource has also kind of made things a lot easier. Blocks all over the country that are being made, they're being stacked as we speak, that don't have any code approvals, and they're fine. But for those companies that want to really take it to the next level, then that is the next level.
Sure. Gotcha. Do you find that you're working within a hybrid model where you're putting wood trusses on an ICF foundation and wall system and wood floor systems like ledgered inside, or however that whole thing comes together? But are you finding that is really where you're predominantly working, or are people going to
whether it be wood? I'm starting to do more steel, but like edge steel, stud trusses, things like that, especially in areas with high termite issues. We're starting to get into a lot more steel construction. We're doing fiberglass or backed gypboard and keeping the wood and the cellulose out of these homes, Texas and places like that. The challenge with the ICF deck systems, the floor, the roof deck systems, they're great, hands down. The home I was talking about down in Isla Mirada, it's 3 levels high with a roof deck. Each level is a concrete system. It's fantastic. However, it's also about 3 times the price.
Sure.
So that's where we run into that cost. What's the ROI? And sometimes the budget is going to dictate, much we would like to do this full concrete envelope, It just doesn't make sense in the budget. There's other alternatives. There's other systems out there. The shorter the spans, we can get into just even a solid B deck system. There's virtually no framing underneath it. It's just a pan deck, and it anchors back into the pre-wall, and we pour 3 inches over the top of it and call it a day. So a lot more cost effective, but it also opens up, what about all the other things that go with it though? That gives us the floor deck, but that doesn't give us anywhere to attach our HVAC system or plumbing lines or electric lines, insulating factors, that kind of thing. So now we're starting to have to build down below it. Now we're adding more cost. So those are those things that we're trying to find that happy balance for our clients, meeting their budget. A lot of my clients along the Gulf Coast that we're doing that might have a little bit more tighter budget, we're actually building an actual safe house, but then we're taking their pantry or their master closet or their laundry room or something like that and turning it into, we're putting a FEMA rated door on it, putting a concrete lid over the top of it, and it becomes the safe room should a catastrophic event occur.
We actually have a design right now that there's a safe room designed into it. This particular house is actually really interesting because some people are under the assumption that if you have an ICF, you can't have inter-story offsets. And that's actually not true. There are ways we can do that. And so in this particular situation, the upstairs does not go all the way across the entire garage. So we have a concrete beam built into the floor system to span that. And then the same thing, we have a master suite that is recessed back relative to the downstairs to create a large balcony outside the master suite on the second floor. Again, concrete beam, we're able to size it equivalent to the floor system. Nobody's the wiser. But what they did do that was really cool in that one is we essentially put in, like, this was a first on the main floor. They built in basically a main floor safe room, or they're calling it a safe. And so, yeah, it's a full steel reinforced door system, concrete lid over the top of it, full ICF around all the walls. As long as you have your supplemental air in there for your HVAC system coming in, pumping air in, you can put whatever you want in there, including people. So yeah, it's a really good option. We were designing our own home to be ICF. We're on the Gulf. We had multiple land deals fall through, which was part of the situation. Then we had a home that was so close to what we were designing come on the market that was wood construction that it was like, okay, do we want to buy a lot and go through the year plus process of design, permitting, construction, or do we literally want to just buy this house and open the doors and boom, we're right in our house? And that's what we opted for. But they did some things that are actually, even though with wood construction, they've done some great things to reinforce it and provide what I will consider a longevity and higher, better performance. So our exterior walls are 2x8 wall construction and everything is spray foam insulation. We have a exterior rigid insulation with a reinforcing board with the stucco. And a lot of our walls are actually double plywooded. So we actually have plywood on the outside and plywood on the inside. There's a his and hers closet, the woman's closet, the larger one. All of the walls are double plywood, and the HVAC was actually purposely put directly above that unit to have direct feed from the HVAC of conditioned or treated air directly into that room. So yeah, there are things that you can plan for in wood construction to get you close to the durability or the efficiency of ICF, but I don't know which one's more cost effective, honestly, simplicity wise, or with having people like you with the experience. It makes it nice because obviously our home was very custom designed. I'm sure the design took a very long time. A lot of additional people had to have insight and planning into it. And it's not your typical design. So whereas ICF, there's not a lot you can't do with it now. If you've got a good designer and you've got an engineer that understands ICF, there's not a lot you can't do with it.
There really isn't. And I think that's kind of drove me into the ICF world even more so is you're absolutely right. You can take wood frame and you can add sheathing and you can add hold downs and anchoring and insulation, and you can take masonry and kind of do the same thing. Where I like the ICF is it's all in one. You get all those benefits. You're building one wall versus you're building a frame wall. Now you're adding sheathing and, labor and components and pieces and parts. It's all included in the ICF. That's where I think that cost aspect starts to align a lot stronger. Also, a lot of kind of new design trends is open. Let's have these big 20-foot wide doors that go from the living room out to the backyard, out to the back patio, or these big windows and views and so on and so forth. And what we're finding is, from a structural standpoint, with a wood frame wall, now we're getting into portal framing, we're getting into Simpson strong walls, things like that. great systems, but they're expensive. Then you add wind loads onto those. Now you got huge footings and anchoring and so on and so forth. With an ICF wall, I put a couple extra sticks of rebar above the top of it and call it a day. I'm oversimplifying, of course, but it's basically that. A lot of times we'll have 16, 18-foot openings, and we don't even have to put pier footings on either side of it because we can distribute that load into the concrete and around. And those are those things, again, from a design standpoint, that we're able to kind of close that gap cost-wise. And it's giving a lot more diversity to the design and allowing the design professional to kind of get that look, get that feel that their client wants. It's also part of the reason why I do a lot of outreach. I do a lot of training. I do webinars. I do on-site training for building officials, for architects, for engineers. I don't want to design all the ICF homes in North America, but I want all the ICF homes designed in North America to be designed right. And so I try and train design professionals how to do it right, how to do it well. I come on as a consultant to help them. Let's learn. It is different. It's not hard. We're not splitting the atom, but there are nuances from it and how to design it, how to be more cost effective with your design, make it work for you, not against you. It's been a lot of fun working with other design professionals that I don't want to say were scared of it, but they were intimidated by it. And then they realize, well, there's just some little nuances that if I do this, this, and this, then there's no problem at all. The challenge is when there's an ICF project that goes bad, it's always the ICF is bad. That was my first thought on those first projects back in the 90s. The ICF sucked. Well, it's really not. The ICF did exactly what it's supposed to do. It was the installer sucked. It was the designer that sucked. We didn't fully understand the ripple effect. And so once you know those things, you can create a better design. You can create a stronger design that gets that vision across. That's actually where another side project that I've been working on started several years ago. I really kind of ramped it up this year, and that was an ICF plan review, where design professionals, homeowners, whomever, developers, contractors could have a home designed by their local design professional and send it to me for $500, $600, $800. I'll review it. I have a 100-point checklist that I go through and I give them feedback of here's where things are done well, here's where things are deficient, here's products, here's materials, here's the different things that can make your project better. And I redline their drawings and I give them this checklist, and then I provide an hour or two of consulting afterwards to answer their questions, because there will be questions. It's to create an affordable solution to give them a much better product in the end. And also they can take that same checklist and then on the next home they design, they can use that same checklist on the next home. Had a really good feedback on that and quite a bit of support on it. It's turned into a nice little side gig for me.
Yeah,
I needed more work, but how to advance the industry.
And I'll say this, like for people looking into, ICF, I like your stance on this. You're very clear and upfront of like, I can design your ICF house. I'm not the cheapest, but you're going to have the least amount of issues because you've seen it all, you've done it all. And that's why people with the experience, boots on the ground, that knowledge, they have a higher charge rate, period. I'm sure we've all heard of the story about the boat that breaks down and they call the guy and the guy shows up with the wrench, or the submarine's broken. They call the guy and the guy shows up with the wrench, and all of a sudden he just hits a pipe and boom, the submarine is working again. And he goes, okay, that'll be $30,000. And they're like, you were here for 5 minutes. And he's like, well, you're not paying me $30,000 because I was here for 5 minutes. You're paying me $30,000 because I know where to hit. Right? So you bring significant value in that knowledge because there are intricacies to the ICF situation. We just had a ICF development that we were a part of. The designer that the owner brought on did not have experience with ICF. And these were simple homes, but it was a constant fight between us and them, and us explaining to them what you are asking us to do, you can't do because this is ICF. And that was from the owner builder who only had built with wood construction and the designer who had only designed with wood construction. And it's frustrating when you're going through that added back and forth of basically trying to explain to the designer, or in this case, the person was a licensed architect, hey, aesthetically, there's nothing wrong with your design. Functionality and how constructability, there's everything wrong with your design. And then you got the contractor going, well, no, we've done it before. And I'm explaining to them, you've done this before with wood construction, not ICF construction. Yeah. So what you're asking to do can be done. However, you have to do these 4 other things, which you haven't done, and you're wanting to submit for permits next week. And to redo these things requires the trusses be re-engineered to a plan for it. Your architect redesign this. We have to redo the engineering of the front wall. Like those things had to be done just because you expected to be able to construct it equivalently to wood, and that just doesn't work. You and I have discussed on a few aspects the constructability with ICF and how having somebody with your knowledge or with our knowledge is actually have engineered a lot of ICF, having that experience honestly saves people money. Because I mean, what we just consulted on that one, that was ridiculous. It's the easiest way to put it. But you had a couple others that you've told me about that were crazy. So yeah.
We got the one that's going to be coming probably pretty soon. House in Virginia, big house, about 10,000 square foot house. But he had hired an engineer to design the concrete deck system and the concrete wall system, ICF wall system. And it was so over-designed, over-engineered that he hired me to do the plan review for it. And outside of the design itself, I couldn't find a lot of redeeming qualities with it. And I've been doing this 40 years. And never in my life have I seen, when I called you, Ro, I told you this, never in my life have I seen a 14-foot wide footing on a home, on a 2-story home.
A little oversized.
I think that with proper design, we can keep the design exactly the way it is, but design it the way the systems are supposed to be designed. And we can cut those footings down. Yeah, there might be some spots where it needs to be a little bit wider. There is an embankment. There's some other things happening there, but not to the degree that this engineer took it on. And the over-design is probably the biggest challenge that I see within the industry outside of bad installers or bad support, is the design professionals take on the attitude of if one stick of rebar is good, then 5 must be good, better. And they don't take into consideration that we've got a 6-inch core wall. And you put 5 number 6s in that wall, and now there's nowhere for the concrete to go.
Right.
Now we've created a dam in the middle of the wall, and the rebar is providing no structural support. It's those kinds of things that you kind of need someone to guide you a little bit. No, more is not always better. More actually can be worse for you. More can actually cause you bigger issues. 90% of the time, it's from people that just don't want to take the time to investigate it, to learn it, to ask questions like myself or you guys on, is this designed right? And sometimes they just take it at face value. I hired an engineer, what must be right? And that's not always the case.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think we talked about another one where the engineer was designing I-beams to sit on top of the ICF forms. That's some high structural capacity styrofoam.
I wasn't quite, but then we had like 3 feet of wall on top of the I-beam. So we built the wall up, set the beam, then build more wall.
Right.
It made no sense to me.
Yeah.
And he argued with me and he fought with me on it. And it's like, this isn't masonry. You can't detail it the same way. There's some similarity, but it is different. There are some nuances that you have to take into consideration.
I mean, ICF in whole, there are similarities of it with masonry and there are similarities of it with regular concrete, but there's nuances to it. I see people go, well, I'm going to do ICF for my basement. I'm like, yeah, you can do ICF for your basement. Why do you want to do ICF for your basement, right? And then that starts a whole different discussion. They're just looking at it as, it's quick form work for me to self-install and then I can pour my wall. And I'm like, no, you still have to put form work outside of the ICF to support the ICF while you pour your wall. And they don't catch on to that. I mean, yes, it does function as the concrete forms, but you still have a ton of extra bracing you have to build out around it. It's still just styrofoam. So there's a lot of aspects to it. One thing on there, and you and I know have talked about it, I've actually talked about this with a few ICF designers, the state of California.
Oh.
So let's educate our listeners on the state of California and their viewpoint on ICF. Good.
State of California, in their infinite wisdom, have their building code and their board of architects, professional whatever it is, I forget exactly its title, but anyway, they've created the California Building Code, and it specifically says that a non-registrant can design a wood frame home anywhere in California. Anything outside of wood frame construction must be designed by both a licensed architect and or a structural engineer. A lot of states have allowed a designer, a drafting service or whatever to design a home, and then you have a structural engineer. Florida does this all the time. You have a structural engineer come in and they do the structure part of it and everyone's happy. California, no. The way that the law has been interpreted in the state of California if a contractor a homeowner sketches a little floor plan on their kitchen dining room table, the minute they say this is an ICF wall, the state of California can legally say they're practicing architecture without a license. The challenge we're running into is, as all these issues that have happened in the state of California with the fires, seismic, they don't get hit with many hurricanes and tornadoes, but the fires and the seismic issues that have hit have really caused, especially the fires, have caused a lot of problems. So people want to build back better. And what's a better system than a 4-hour rated firewall if you're building in a fire zone? And what they're finding is they can't, because there's two things happening. Number one, the registered architects that are there don't understand ICF, don't want to design with ICF. And so they push people away from it. They tell them it's too expensive, it's too much money, there's too many problems. So they scare people away. Or the state's going after people that did hire their contractor to do their plans, or a drafting service or design service to do their plans. The minute it says ICF, now the state's coming after them and hitting them with practicing without a license violations. And in the process, it could actually nullify people's permits. It could nullify their permits and nullify their certificate of occupancies. So I actually wrote an article about it for ICF Builder magazine a couple of years ago. It's sad, the position that the state has taken on, because they're one of the states that, outside of the Gulf Coast states, I think they have the opportunity to reap the most benefit with safety, California's energy standards with their Title 24, so on and so forth. This is something people want to build with, something people want to use.
It is really ridiculous. The reason I bring it up, I am purposely beating on the state of California, is because they're the only state that this exists in.
There's a couple of New Jersey, New York, they require all homes to be designed by a registrant. That's fine. It's a blanket statement. Everybody can do it. It's not this, if you're part of this club, you can. If you're not part of that club, you can't. The California's done. Yeah, they're the only ones that have implemented that rule.
They've drawn a very, very odd line in the sand. And as you stated, they benefit the most from it, because the fact of the matter is California struggles for energy. The amount of things that you would have to do to wood construction to make it as energy efficient as ICF is significant. And the ROI, I don't know if it's there. And then the seismic loading, the high fire hazard. You go up into the mountains, you're snow loading. I've done a few houses in Tahoe. I worked on one house. It was a 185-pound roof snow load. Trying to get that work for wood construction was a chore. ICF construction, no problem whatsoever. Not to mention that house was right in the line of the last big fire that ran through Tahoe, because I used to live in Tahoe. They have all these regulations. As a homeowner, you're not allowed to rake your pine needles. They require basically all the debris that falls out of the tree to stay on the ground, which then just turns into kindling. And then they're surprised when a fire rolls through.
Some of the hardest discussions I've had, especially in the last year, are people that call me from California because they lost their home. They lost everything. Right. And we want to build our home back. We want to build it better. We love our lot. We love our views. And sorry, I can't help you. And who should we call? There's only a couple people in the state of California that I know that understand ICF that I can put my name behind, and they're slammed busy. So it's very limited. And I think that the state is doing their citizens a disservice.
Absolutely.
Long list of disservice that they're doing, but that's the easy one. Low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
I got a couple questions, not about the state of California, but before we get on to something else, the nuances that you're talking about. So for instance, just starting at the very bottom at the foundation and site prep, and we don't need to spend a great deal of time on this, but I have some curiosity here. So the site prep that you do, you have a certain pounds per square foot, pounds per square inch that you're needing compaction or your soil to hit. And your 11.25-inch walls that are concrete with polystyrene, I believe most of it's EPS on foam, right? Or whatever. Mm-hmm. The weight of that 11.25-inch wall of concrete, is there different standards that people have to prep their site for compared to like a standard slab on grade or shallow crawl or something like that, footing, shallow stem wall setup? Is the site prep different from a weight perspective or thing like that? Is that one of the nuances?
So generally speaking, there really isn't a lot of difference in site prep on most projects, exception to every rule. For most projects, there isn't. Even the footing sizing is usually very similar with an ICF wall over traditional construction. As it's been explained to me by numerous engineers, is the great thing about concrete is with wood construction, you got that point load that goes from the top of the roof all the way down to the ground, and it follows a continuous path. The studs spread out and it goes down, and so you have all these points where all this concentrated load is. With concrete, it just kind of goes out as a cone. and it just spreads that load around everywhere. And so you don't have that direct load path that you have to contend with in most scenarios. There are cases where it happens.
So is the site prep then, Royal, as a site prep, because it spreads the load not at a point load, trib halfway, point load or whatever, is it less strenuous or less criteria for your site, or do they just hold you to the same standards that they do on our standard stem wall or slab?
Yeah, so typically with ICF, we're using the ICF is also your stem wall. So we're pouring either a slab with a thickened edge footing, or we're pouring just a perimeter footing and going straight up from there. The additional load from the weight of the ICF is pretty trivial in the grand scheme of it, because it does distribute. Not to mention, if you think about it in bigger terms, that ICF wall is basically functioning like a massive concrete beam. And so it can and will distribute the loading across its length as it's functioning as a beam once you get below those window openings, right? So once you get it below any window openings, or in the case of like retaining wall, it is doing a large distribution of those forces. And so, no, it's not something that we have to go into more significant prep for that. As far as the site, the more the nuances occur in the detailing construction of elements, how we're attaching to it versus how we're attaching the elements to ICF versus how we would attach them to a plain concrete wall or a masonry wall. Or as we discussed, the use as a steel beam over the top of an ICF, right? ICF doesn't have the capability of just holding the significant weight of something just by itself. It's still just styrofoam. It's still just a styrofoam block. And so every opening we have to design as being a concrete lintel. And so the lintel is basically we're adding rebar over the opening, tying it into the side, very similar how a header would tie into trimmer and king studs in wood construction. But it's all just to get that load distribution, and you pour it all uniform. You pour it all as a part. You build in the blockouts, or some of the ICF suppliers have what's called bucking, where they actually have the extra styrofoam. Yeah, they have the extra styrofoam pieces that perfectly fit in around the opening, and then they install your shoring into the opening to block it out. But then you have a fully insulated wrapped opening. So there's a lot of things with it that just get work under your belt doing them to know that those nuances existed.
So site prep doesn't really change. How about moving into let's just skip the slab on grade or wood framed floor. So moving into the walls, then how do people get their electrical, plumbing, outlets, all of the penetrations if you have this big concrete wall that you need to move all your utilities through?
He's got a perfect example.
I got
For those that can't see, he has a little diagram.
I got my little diagram. So you see this little plastic piece, kind of in the middle here. The great thing about what the ICF industry's done, earlier on you asked about the kind of changes in the industry. This is one of the things that they did, is these are called webs. Number one, you see the little ridges here in the big blocks, the ones that are actually built with. These are chairs. So your rebar sits right on these chairs. It snaps right in. You want it on the inside face, outside face, right in the middle, whatever you need. But it also comes, and they go top to bottom. It's 1.5 inches wide, just like a stud. They're 8 inches on center. Some of the blocks have them 6 inches on center. And you can find them with a stud finder. They actually have a pull-out strength greater than wood stud. Use screws instead of nails. So like hanging pictures, hanging grandma's big fancy mirror that weighs 200 pounds, you can screw it right into these webs. If you really got to anchor something in, it really needs to be anchored in, you could do a wedge anchor right into the concrete.
3,000-inch TV.
Exactly. But hanging cabinets, hanging things like that, you can go right into the webs, multiple anchor. Like I said, they're every 8 inches, so you could set multiple anchor points. So things that you can't always do with traditional wood construction. They've kind of solved that problem for you.
So then people aren't framing wood frame walls on the inside in order to run electrical and plumbing and have all of those openings in their walls. And so how does sheetrock work is my question.
So sheetrock attaches right to those web points, just like I was talking about. They work just like a stud. The ones that are 8 inches on center, the drywall guys like it because it's still in that 16 or 24 inch increment that their hand knows. I go over this far and after the next screw, go ahead.
There's a void there?
It's not really a void, but the webs are set in, like I said, they're 1.5 inches wide. They're set in about roughly 1/4 inch from the face of the foam. So as they start to screw the drywall in, it'll catch that plastic and suck it right in. You don't get the pull-out issues that you get with wood studs sometimes. Plumbing and electric, the only challenge we run into with that is typically the foam is roughly 2.5, 2 3/4 inch thick. We have a toilet. A toilet has a 3-inch vent stack, 3 inches bigger than 2.5 inches. So we can do one of two things. We can fur that wall in a little bit just behind where the toilet is, or just the bathroom wall. Or if you think about it, there's usually another wall that's next to the toilet that is going to come perpendicular into that wall. Make it a 6-inch wall, run your vent stack in the frame wall, not in the ICF wall, call it a day. Your dryer box, your washer box, your electrical panel. Those big things, sometimes we've got to fur those walls out a little bit to accommodate the thickness, if we want a more flush design, or just put them on an interior frame wall. Those are those things that kind of come into the design, the layout, to properly lay out. So you don't have to do a lot of the furring of the walls. Typically, we don't have to. We can run everything right in the foam.
So let me give you an example. So in the garage, your electrical panel is generally inset into that stud bay in the garage, 4 foot from the garage door, right? On the inside. If that's an exterior wall and it's ICF, are they bucking out that wall, or are they having to fur it out in order to get a flush panel? Or are they just surface mounting in the case of ICF?
We've done it both ways. We've actually bucked it out like a window opening, and we set a plywood backing in behind it, and it's able to recess right into that wall. Sometimes it is what it is. They just fur it out, and they can bring a pop out around it to kind of dress it out a little bit.
Gotcha.
Those are sometimes the challenges that we run into with utilities.
So then someone would have their house designed and then reviewed, let's say by you, and redlined, and then they'd pick up all those red lines, and then they would send those plans to one of the block manufacturers, and they would design, to Royal's point, if they're going to have fully insulated window wraps, or if they have things in specific areas, will they actually design the block and ship that out as a whole system that's already kind of pre-cut for a house? There are companies that do that.
There are companies that do that. Most of them, you're buying a 4-foot long block that looks like this. Some of them are 8 feet, some of them are 6 feet, whatever. But that's what shows up on your site, and they just cut it to whatever they need.
So the
there are companies that are going more
that.
modular. Your ICF installer is doing it. They're the ones that are typically, plans are designed, instead of going straight to the manufacturer, they're going to the local rep or the local installer. They're the ones that are doing the takeoffs and kind of figuring out those nuances. As far as wrapping, like the openings, those should all be detailed out in plans themselves. Anyway, we want to be able to tell the window guy how to attach his window or his door into this concrete, so it can be flashed out and sealed and everything he needs.
So then moving up into, let's say, where the trusses land on top of the wall, typically you would just land a truss on a wood frame 2x6 wall, say it has a double top plate, and you put your H2.5 or your H1 up there. In the case of not having, let's say in the Northwest, Doug fir touching concrete, are they putting like a plate across the top of the wall and landing the truss on that, like a mud sill type of scenario?
That's usually the easiest way to go. Something that we'll do between floors, like a basement and an upper floor, is we'll have an 8-inch thick core on the basement. We'll have a 6-inch core for the upper level. It creates a little bit of a ledge. That gives us a point where we can actually either do one or two things. We can either put a ledger, right on the face of the ICF wall, face of the concrete, or we could use that lip. And there's ways we can design to use that lip as the top cord bearing or bottom cord bearing for that, like, floor truss.
I see.
Let's make the system work for us. The ICF block systems, they call them taper tops, where it actually kind of flares back within the block. So it gives you a little bit wider concrete base for that scenario. They've also created, it's called a brick ledge. And the block itself flares out so that, like, on the outside, you could have like a brick veneer, like a full-size brick or stone veneer. Now it gives you that concrete base to sit on. We can do the same thing on the inside too, and we'll just bury it into like a floor truss. You get that flare out, and it gives a much meatier anchor point that we can set our truss on. Yeah, they've really created a lot of options on different solutions for multiple problems.
One of the things I've heard Royal talk about is the HVAC systems and moisture and having humidity and having that needing to be something that is one of the biggest crucial elements to not having degradation of your furniture and your trim, and humidity levels being incorrect and things really going sideways from, I guess, the tightness or the breathability, if you will, around the house. So you talk about that a little bit. I know Royal's got an opinion.
The building envelope is so tight. There's a saying in our industry, build tight, ventilate right. And that's true here. These homes are so incredibly tight that you have to have proper ventilation, proper HVAC system design. These HVAC systems are typically 30 to 50% smaller than your traditional homes. Think of it like living in a Yeti cooler. You go out for the weekend, you throw ice in the cooler on Friday. it's still full of ice on Sunday. Well, same thing is happening here. But we got to make sure that we don't get that dead air, that stagnant air, that bad air, staying where it is. We want to bring in ERVs, HRVs to help cycle that. And having someone that really understands those systems. You're in humid communities, maybe you need a dehumidifier. You're in cold, dry communities, maybe you need a humidifier. Also, it helps create that comfort level, too, within your home. Because, like I said, the old saying, my home needs to breathe. No, it doesn't have lungs. If it's breathing, that means you're not controlling the air. If we're not controlling the air, you're getting moisture, you're getting potential for mold buildup, you're causing degradation of the system, health issues, and so on and so forth. So, no, we want it tight. We just want to ventilate it right.
So it's super important then for someone interested in ICF to be contacting the right person, the right company in order to evaluate that.
It can be a critical point. Even the new wood frame homes, these homes are being built so much tighter and so much more energy efficient than they were just 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. And your contractor with his old rule of thumb of X number of square feet per ton of air conditioning doesn't work anymore. We need it properly designed. We need it properly engineered. Manual J, Manual S, Manual D. That's getting us in the right direction. It's not necessarily a solution, the whole solution, but it's part of getting us in the right direction of creating this home as a system.
We could have an entire hour and a half conversation just on how to properly HVAC or ventilate and condition, because there's so much equipment out there. There's so many options out there now. It is very region dependent. I mean, the type of system that I have in my house, even though it's wood construction, it's built very tight, but the type of system I have in my house, it wouldn't be conducive, nor would you want to put it in somebody that lives more inland or lives in a drier climate. It just, so that it is very regional specific, square footage specific, and even your floor system and your roof system comes into question.
Robert, do you do any, like, when you say you did trainings and webinars and you guys met each other at IBS, do you speak or do any of those workshops at IBS at all?
I think I'm going to be speaking at IBS this year. I haven't got confirmation. I'm going to try and nail that down. I'm actually going to Denver for the NAHB meetings next week. And one of the groups I'm meeting with is the Concrete Homes group of the NAHB. And hopefully we'll be nailing down some speaking opportunities for that in Orlando.
Yeah, I'd love to attend. We're going to be there, and I'd love to attend that if you end up doing that.
Yeah.
So
I'll put it out there. Everyone will know.
Awesome. Well, hey, sir. Well, speaking of your marketing prowess, how can people find you?
Easiest place to find me is on my website, RKDZNS, RobertKlobDesigns.com. And ICFPlanReview.com is my secondary site. It'll actually lead you back to the original site. And all my contact information is there.
Wonderful. We'll also be sure to post all your contact information on our social media and YouTube and everywhere we distribute this podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on here. You're a wealth of knowledge when it comes to ICF.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate getting to know you guys a little bit better. And, we'll be working on some more projects here coming up pretty quick.
Thank you again. If you enjoyed this show, please like and subscribe and share the show with anybody that you think may benefit from knowledge of ICF construction. If you're needing assistance with anything ICF, you said Robert Klob is one of the best in the nation with it. Pleasure to have him. PLIRIS is very experienced in ICF engineering as well. And we've partnered with Robert and many other designers around the U.S. on their projects. So thank you for listening, and everybody have a great day.